Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, production of iHeartRadio.
And welcome to another Feminist Around the World. And for today's Feminist Around the World, we are featuring a nonprofit or a network that has been advocating and continues to bring much needed attention to the things that are happening in Sudan and the surrounding areas. And that organization is the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa, or SIHA, S-I-H-A. We're going to call it SIHA for now. If any of you know that I'm saying this wrong, please let me know, as per usual. But I'm going to assume that it's an acronym, and we're going to go with it.
Mm-hmm. Sounds right.
Just a content warning. We're not talking in depth about anything, but we will be mentioning the war crimes that are happening in Sudan and around. So obviously, gender-based violence, sexual violence will be mentioned. FYI. And here's some information about the network. According to their site, sihanet.org, the network was created by women activists from Somaliland, Ethiopia, and Sudan in the mid-1990s. Today, we continue to work as an inclusive and diverse feminist women's rights network that holds a unique position working as a regional civil society network in politically volatile context. SIHA works in a variety of cultural, political, and geographical environments in Uganda, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea, Somalia, Somaliland, Sudan, and South Sudan. In this part of the world, women are particularly portrayed and perceived as victims, but SIHA challenges the status quo and the notion that African women are victims. SIHA acknowledges that almost all challenges that women face are based on socially constructed norms, and that these norms actively subordinate women. We work through and firmly believe in the collective power of African women. We are convinced beyond any doubt that if African women are given the space, they will drive change in this region and beyond. Defying presumptions about African women, SIHA has been carried on the shoulders of numerous African women's rights activists and has been sustained by their relentless commitment to their cause. SIHA approaches the struggle for women's rights in the Greater Horn of Africa as a political one, and as such, we hold our aims of fundamental political transformation at the forefront.
And they continue to explain, in this region, religious militancy often disguises itself as an ideology for resistance against state corruption and ethnic/cultural biases, when in actuality, it is a strategy used by states to oppress and subordinate their populations, with ethnic/religious minorities, the poor, and women being the groups most acutely impacted. This is why SIHA works on addressing religious militancy without fear, and in doing so, our connection to our constituency is deepened. This work has been particularly important in Sudan and Somalia. SIHA works to challenge militarism and military institutions as they perpetuate the subjugation of women in order to maintain power. Our work in Sudan and South Sudan particularly speaks to this, especially the lead SIHA played in extending support to women human rights defenders and activists in Sudan during their struggle against the totalitarian ex-regime. SIHA works to empower civil activists in conflict and post-conflict situations because we believe that conflicts can only end with civil activism and citizens' active involvement in peaceful governance. Our work in Sudan through the resistance committees of the Sudanese Revolution proves the strength of women's rights activists within civil society. Right.
And they've been working extensively to call out the continued inaction of so many advocacy groups when it comes to Sudan. In an article written for Alliance magazine, they write, quote, "Since the war began, it has been the revolutionary and neighborhood committees and other people's efforts in Sudan and bordering countries that are ensuring safe passage for Sudanese and foreign civilians, building hospitals in the rubble, and attempting to meet the needs of the people. Feminists, women, LGBTIQ, and other people have organized at home through social media and in the diaspora. Regional Black feminist groups like the Strategic Initiative for the Horn of Africa, SIHA, have gotten hundreds of people to safety and supplied life-saving supplies to hundreds of households in Sudan. SIHA also continues to amplify the demands of Sudanese women's rights groups in their membership. Regional Director of SIHA, Hala Al-Karib, spoke at the United Nations Security Council Open Debate on Women, Peace, and Security in October of 2023 to urge them to, quote, initiate independent and impartial investigations for the gender-based violence occurring in Sudan. And according to the Sudan Tribune, she told the council, quote, hold all parties accountable for any acts of sexual violence and strengthen the existing sanctions regime to include sexual and gender-based violence as a standalone designation criterion. and I do want to get into Al-Qarib's background from their site, but I can't believe that's not already a thing. I'm not going to lie, like as I was reading through this and the fact that it has been, and we've talked continuously when we talk about feminists around the world, especially in war-torn countries, about the atrocious war crimes against women and children in itself. Not that the men aren't suffering, they really are, but when it comes to gender-based violence, especially such as rape and kidnapping and enslavement, like it's just overwhelming. And the fact that this is not already a criteria, it's like confusing, surprising. Back to that about Al-Qarib. Hala Al-Qarib was born and raised in Sudan and later lived in Canada. She currently lives and works in Uganda. She has lived and worked in South Sudan, Kenya, and Egypt, as well as the Eastern and Horn of Africa for over 20 years. Hala's work specifically focuses on women and girls' rights activism and social movement, as well as refugees and displaced persons and minority communities' challenges. She has wide and comprehensive expertise on the Horn and Eastern Africa regions as a civil society worker/activist and social and gender research practitioner. Her educational background is on human rights, women's studies, and psychology. And of course, she's served on so many things and has written for so many different publications, such as Al Jazeera and so many. And she continues to be the leader for this organization in demanding changes and accountability, honestly.
And the article continues. Al-Qarib further painted a grim picture of the war's consequences, noting that millions of women have lost their livelihoods and savings, leading to limited access to food and essential health care. Women and children, who make up the majority of the displaced population, are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. She underscored the challenges faced in delivering this aid due to a lack of funding, denial of humanitarian access, and security and administrative obstacles imposed by the Sudan Armed Forces, SAF. Al-Qarib also highlighted the unfortunate reality that humanitarian delivery rarely incorporates the perspectives of women despite their pivotal role in the response efforts. SIHA director emphasized the need to end all violence targeting civilians, ensure the safe passage of civilians, and put a halt to the destruction of critical civilian infrastructure. Her words carried a weight of urgency, imploring the international community to take swift and resolute action in the face of a humanitarian crisis that cannot be ignored.
Right. And in another conference, which was also covered by the Sudan Tribune, which was held a month later after that initial conference we talked about, which called for the solidarity with Sudanese women, which was organized by SIHA, Al-Qarib talked about the importance of forming feminist groups. Quote, Al-Qarib emphasized the need to form feminist groups and bodies to access the situation, document the extent of atrocities committed against women, and share this information with the world. She also called for communication with all regional and international bodies to hold those responsible for those crimes accountable and take deterrent measures to prevent their recurrence. The conference's final statement called for ensuring the effective participation of women and their civil society organizations in a leadership role in all stages of the political processes related to conflict resolution and peace in Sudan.
And of course, they also stressed the need for justice and accountability for the crimes like gender-based violence and war crimes. The article continued. It also demanded that gender-based crimes of sexual violence be included in the political process as a core issue, including accountability, transitional justice, and reparations. The Solidarity Conference called for the establishment of a court to specifically address war crimes committed, with a focus on violence against women and girls to ensure justice and seriously deal with the issues of gender-based sexual violence. And, quote, the Solidarity Conference participants also stressed the importance of implementing the recommendations of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to investigate atrocities committed during the war, with a particular focus on gender-based violence. The participants also called on the African Union to take immediate and decisive measures to facilitate the cessation of hostilities and establish a mission to investigate war crimes.
And this is from their site, SIHA.net, and what their aims and visions are, which is, quote, SIHA aims to contribute to unlock the massive potential of the women's rights movement in the GHOA. This will be accomplished by strengthening the education of civil society organizations so that they can build a strong collective that advocates systemic change. In this way, SIHA works through and in support of broad coalitions of grassroots members to campaign and advocate women's rights and equality, and also envisions women and girls in the GHOA living in peace, just environment where they can exercise their equal rights as human beings. So very, very broad, and there's a lot more different articles about what they're trying to do and the attention that they're trying to bring and how they are also bringing people to safety from these war-torn areas. And we know, we've talked about before, Sudan, it's a big conflict and there's not enough eyes on them, honestly. We're not paying attention closely enough. Organizations like this is very important and does call out some really big need for changes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, once again, something I'm sure we'll be looking back on, talking more about. But as always, listeners, if you have any suggestions, if you have any thoughts or resources, you can email us at stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You. We have a TeePublic store and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.